So I was scrolling through the comments on my video, Worst Fish versus Worst Fish, and it seems that you guys are obsessed with the Coca-Cola Gambit. So I decided to make a video, and now all of you can learn the theory for yourselves. So the Coca-Cola Gambit begins with G4, which is the Grob. And for the Gambit to work, your opponent must play G5, which is known as the double Grob. And as you can see, the eval is plus 0.4, which means that this is a very solid opening. You see, when you have d4 and e4, the eval is always like 0.3, 0.4, which means that this opening is just very solid, and you should have a good chance with this opening. And you see right here, the Coca-Cola Gambit is f4, and this f-pawn is like your drink of Coca-Cola. And you're like offering the Coca-Cola bottle to your opponent. And I think we're lucky that this is a Coca-Cola bottle instead of a Bud Light bottle or some alcohol, or else it might explode or I might get canceled. But either way, there are several ways that black can respond to this. One of which is just taking the pawn. The other is just like putting the knight on f6, d5, and also there's the very explosive Pepsi counter gambit, which is f5.
Napoleon chess. What is the point of this opening?
I do not know, bro. I do not know. This opening is just a good opening for a noobs, okay? If you're a noob, you should play this opening. Okay, so let's delve into the main line. The main line theory is g takes f4, taking the pawn. And right here, the main move is e3, but that is not a good move, because as you can see, if you play e3, white wins only 24% of the time, while black wins 49% of the time. And you can do the math, and black wins more than half the time as white. So then you can play d4, which is the top engine move. If you play d4, you see the bishop, it sees the pawn. So this is why d4 is a good move. And one way that black can respond is d5. And now the black bishop also sees this pawn. Right here, we have two bishops eyeing two different pawns. You can ignore the eval, it says minus 1.4, but you see this position is relatively normal, if you can call it that. We have bishop takes f4, bishop takes g4, just trading pawns. Knight to c3, pawn to e6, queen to d2, knight to f6, and long castles. After long castles, see, this position looks pretty normal. White has gambited a pawn for more development. The knight can go to b5 and target the c7 square. And this knight can develop to f3. And the bishop is also very powerful. And you have a bishop that's staring into nowhere, and a knight that isn't really doing anything, and a king that's still somewhat open in the center. So that's why I think this variation is pretty good for white. Instead of playing d5, black can also play e5. And e5 seems to just hang a pawn, but there is something very menacing. If you take the pawn, then we have queen to h4 check, and white is in check, and the king cannot move, except go to d2. And if the king goes to d2, then the king is wide open and exposed, and black can just start harassing the king. And harassing the king is not very nice for the king. So instead of taking the pawn, we have to play the move h4, so that the queen cannot go to h4. And after something like d6, d takes c5, d takes c5, we take the queen, the king takes, and then after something like g5, black is up a pawn, but still the king cannot castle. And if we can just somehow develop our pieces and castle this way, white should be somewhat fine. Okay, now that's the mainline theory. What about the Pepsi counter gambit, which is f5? And as you can see, the eval just completely reversed. Originally it was minus 1.4, now it's plus 1.4. And this is why the Coca-Cola Gambit is good. If black tries to offer us a Pepsi after we offer them a Coca-Cola, then we can play g takes f5, g takes f4, that trades a pawn, and e4. And if you're black, and you're a noob. You can probably see, ooh, I can do en passant. But if I do en passant, then there is queen to h5. Checkmate.